In this lesson, we're going to be talking about using float to position objects in CSS. And in this first part, we're going to show you the traditional use of float, which is to float an image and to have the text wrap around the image. So here we have a floating image, and here's the text that wraps around it. This image is floating to the left, and so the text naturally wraps around it to the right. Let's look at this in the document. So here is our XHTML document. We have the style inside of the style tag, and down here we have the text. So we have a div with an ID selector of text box and an image with a class selector of float left. And the div wraps around all of this content. The image is the first item in the content, and then after that we have the text. So the float left class is right here, and you see it just has a couple of items. It has the float property with the left value and margin right of 15 pixels. And so that makes this image float off to the left and gives it this nice little 15 pixel margin before the text that floats around it to the right. And the text box, of course, has the background color and the width of 750 pixels because we have 720 plus the left and right padding. And has this border, and it's centered on the page. And so that's this object here, and all of the image and the text is all contained within that. Now, if I wanted the text to float to the right, I could use my float right class. And you'll notice up here we have both the float left and the float right, and the only difference is that the value for the float property is right, and the margin is now in the left instead of the right. So if we save that and reload in the browser, you see that the image now floats to the right, and the text wraps around it to the left and around. And that margin is now there on the left side of the image. Now, if we want the text to not wrap, the way that we accomplish that is by using a clear property. And so I'm just going to take this, I'm going to go down here to the paragraph, and I'm going to say style equals, and I'm going to say clear right. So this will make the paragraph not wrap around anything that's floating to the right. Save this and reload. And now that paragraph clears the object that's floating on the right. Of course, the heading is still wrapping around, but the paragraph is not. And that's because of that clear property. If I change the clear property to say clear left, and then it will only clear objects that are floating to the left. I'll save that. And so it won't clear anymore. Now the text is wrapping around again because the clear property specifies the left value, and this object is floating on the right. I could say clear both, which will make it clear anything that's floating on the left or the right. And then it's clearing again. So that in a nutshell is the float property as it applies to an image. But the other useful aspect of the float property is to use it on columns of text. Here we have our 3-column document again, and this time we're using float to make these 3 columns. And this is actually very, very simple to do, and this is the technique that we're going to be using when we build the website. This is the most common way to make columns of text using CSS positioning instead of tables. Here we have our same document that we've had before, and we have the 3 columns of text and the ID properties, first, second, and third, and the ID of the outer div is called outer. And up here is the style sheet. You'll notice that there's no position properties at all. Instead, all we have here is the outer box just has its dimensions and its centering and such, and each of these columns of text has float left, and float left. And so what this does is really quite simple. This first block is floated to the left, and so anything after it will wrap around starting on the right. And so the second one appears to the right because the left one is floating. But this second one also has float left, and so anything after it will wrap also to the right. So the third one is also to the right of it because of the float left there. So you can stack as many columns as you want. This is an example with 3, and they have to fit in the containing box. That's the only limitation. So you just make sure that they fit, and voila, you have it. So this is the most common way to make columns using CSS positioning instead of tables for layout. And this is what we'll be using in our example website.